All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. This is our podcast from Viewpoint Ministries International, and today we have Temi Ogunlesi as our guest today. Thank you so much for joining us on this platform today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so today we have this topic to briefly talk about before we call it a day. Practical steps to live in obedience to God's will. Now, I want to encourage everybody who's listening to this podcast to go on YouTube and listen to the YouTube live that we just did. The topic over there was about the young generation and new wave gospel of liberty. That will give you a full scope into this I will call this subtopic right now because this is a really short one. And so my question to you is that what are the steps that one can take to live in obedience to God's will? Over to you.
All right. Well, there's many ways that I could say that one can live in the obedience to God's will. I would say the first thing is to actually totally surrender yourself to God. A lot of times I feel like as Christians and as believers, we want to be one step in the door, but still have like a little bit of a leg out the door. And I feel like in order for us to live in obedience to God's will, you have to totally surrender like your being to Him and actually put your full trust into God. There's no way for you to obey God's will, but you're still on the fence about fully believing in Him and putting your full trust into Him. A lot of times it's easy for us to be skeptical about certain things like, I know God said that He would do this for me, but you're still kind of like, but I feel like there's a chance that He's not. And it's like, God's going to give unto you what is deserved to you, but you also have to give Him the space and opportunity to do His will for you. And in order for you to actually be able to do that, you have to actually totally surrender yourself to Him. Trust in Him that what God says you'll see to fruition is going to come to fruition. Knowing your temptations. A lot of times we as Christians know this is something that tempts me to do wrong. So in order for you to live in obedience with God, you have to actually identify where your weaknesses are, where your temptations are. Like, oh, I realize that if I do this one thing, like I tend to slip back into sin, even if it's like maybe dating this one person. And I notice that it always causes me to backslide into temptations. And I know that this is my weakness. Actually identifying your weakness and making a conscious effort to constantly avoid those temptations makes a lot of difference when it comes to actually completing the will of God, because it's hard to complete the will of God if you're always looking behind you to what's tempting you and what looks good. It's always good to kind of like look behind us and think that, oh, if I do this one thing, even though I know it's a sin, I know I'm gonna enjoy doing it. But like knowing that you have to, if you want to be in God's will, you have to completely like remove that sin from you and actually make a conscious effort not to continue to fall into that same sin, which also kind of like leads in the line of also creating a clean slate for yourself. So actually going ahead and like when you do realize you backslide, going ahead and praying to God about the sin that you have committed and actually being like, God, wash me that I may be as white as snow. Forgive me, Lord, for like this sin that I have actually committed against you that I know was wrong for me to do. And I'm going to make a conscious I'm going to also always make like a conscious effort not to commit this sin again against you, God. So also like making sure that you're consistently like praying to God for forgiveness whenever you do commit a sin against Him. And also just doing the right thing consciously. Also always thinking ahead, not thinking in the present, but also just thinking in the future about how my sin might affect my chances with God, or how my sin is going to affect how other people see me, or how God is looking at me when I'm committing that sin. So also kind of like always remember that God is in a sense watching you and is seeing all of the sins that you are doing. So in order for you to obey God's will, you also have to just make the right decisions consciously. As Christians, we're never going to be perfect and be without sin, But if you're more conscious about the decisions that you're making in your day-to-day lives, you're less likely to make all of these slip-ups. And actually learning from your mistakes is a big one. Like learning from your mistake and seeing where that caused you to land and not making that same mistake again, because you're like, it's not even worth it. Like, I just know this is not what God wants me to do. So also always making the conscious decision to do right.
Wow. I was trying to write, but I couldn't catch up, so I'll go listen to it, of course, later on. But thank you so much for making this easy for us and possible for us, talking about practical steps to live in obedience to God's will. And you've given us really some real steps that one don't need to think too much about it. You don't need to, it's not far-fetched, it's just within us. Surrender yourself to God. Do not double date. Okay, total surrender is critical. You talk about you cannot sit on the fence. You cannot sit on the fence. No, you can either be hot or be cold. Know your temptation, identify your weaknesses, make conscious efforts to avoid those temptations. Create a clean slate for yourself. Be conscious in doing the right things, make right decisions, learn from mistakes. Wow, very powerful, very powerful. Wow. Those are really powerful steps, and I want to say a big thank you so much for making these possible for us here today on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Very good. Don't go nowhere yet. We still need to talk. Stay with me in the studio. Wow, very good. Thank you, everybody. We have now come to the end of today's podcast. And wherever you are listening, or if you get to watch this live at the later time, feel free to visit our website www.viewpointministriesinternational.org, and also feel free to email us info@viewpointministriesinternational.org, and we will appreciate your effort. And don't forget, you can also support our vision here, support our mission as well, to provide needed and necessary support and assistance to the community, further the prospect of peaceable living and overcome challenges through the provision of instructions and information on practical Christian living within and outside the United States of America. And as we'll say, together, join us to earnestly contend for the faith. Until next time, I remain yours, Solomon Oluwabiye. Have a wonderful week, everyone.